Good afternoon. I'm Brent Glass. I'm the co-founder and senior advisor for the National History Academy. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program on the National Mall history and symbolism. The National History Academy's mission is to educate and engage and inspire students, middle school and high school students, in the study of American history. And our assumption is that history is a resource for understanding our own times and for inspiring us to engage in becoming better citizens. And so the History Academy has been in existence since 2018. And we had a wonderful residential program in 2018 and 2019. And then in 2020, because of the pandemic, we pivoted to an online program with virtual programs, including field trips, virtual field trips to various sites around the country. And we believe that the power of place is very important in understanding American history. So with that, I'm going to introduce our director of middle school programs, our educational director of middle school programs, Amy Trenkel. Amy is an 8th grade US history teacher, a National History Day sponsor, and a model UN advisor at Alice Steele Middle School in Washington, DC, where she has been teaching since 2012. She's been teaching in the DC public schools since 1999. And she is also an adjunct professor of American history. She at American University, excuse me. She has taught for National History Day, National History Academy since 2019, and she has been the educational director of the middle school programs since 1920. So Amy, I'm delighted to introduce you, and you will introduce our main speaker.
Thank you, Brent. It is so exciting to introduce our guest today. Jenna Epstein serves as the education specialist at the National Mall and Memorial Parks in Washington, D.C., where she gets to share her love of history with students in the park and now virtually. Inspired by her own 5th grade teacher to pursue history, she started as a volunteer with the National Park Service during college in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And she worked seasonally for about 5 years in Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Virginia before coming to DC, where she's been for more than 20 years. You are in for a real treat today, somebody who truly knows the park and can speak to the rich history and stories that it tells. So thank you so much, Jen, for joining us and sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Amy. My expertise at unmuting is not so good today, but oh goodness. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Here's the place that I've called home for quite some time, the National Mall. And I'm going to focus today on the Lincoln Memorial and the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, 2 sites that have a great connection. And these 2 places have just lots and lots of stories. I'm sure more stories than I actually have time for. But I'm really excited to be joining the National History Academy group today, and look forward to answering any questions along the way. I admit I'm used to being a little more interactive, where I ask a lot of questions. So you might find me asking and then answering my own questions, but we'll see how this goes. So as Amy said, I was introduced to history by my 5th grade teacher, who I still keep up with a little bit today. And after that 5th grade year, I grew up in New England. I was just so interested in history that I wanted to go see all the places that I had learned about. And so I dragged the family on many a vacation to Philadelphia, to Gettysburg, to Washington, D.C., where here I am standing on the steps that have become quite familiar to me now, as I have worked on the mall for over 20 years. So to look back on this, I've had this picture in my office for quite a bit of time too. It's pretty funny to look at this, particularly because my brother now is much taller than I am. And so to see us looking like this in the early 1980s, perhaps, standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial is pretty funny. Here is the National Mall, and most times when I'm talking to students, and now that we're doing things virtually and we're talking to students all over the country, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that when we say the National Mall, we're not referring to like a great shopping center. We're talking about the area in downtown Washington, D.C., which is known as the mall, because long before we had our shopping malls, the word mall meant like a big open space. And so here on the National Mall, this was like the centerpiece of the city as it's getting built up. All of this open space where people have all kinds of activities happening here on the mall. We have our Smithsonian museums today. We have our monuments that people come and walk around and visit. But it's also a local park for people who live in this area to come and go jogging or play kickball after work, or you can even see some baseball fields in the distance here. So this is a park, but it's got so many purposes, and you know, you can turn on the news almost any night and see it there as well. We're so close to the government that people come here, and it's a place that's become known for its First Amendment demonstrations. People want to share their opinions and have their voices heard, and so they may come here for those reasons too. So the mall has a lot happening here, but it didn't always look like this. This is a fairly modern shot from the top of the Washington Monument, by the way, about 500 feet up. And this gives us a good sense, if you're not from Washington or familiar with the area, the sites we're going to talk about today, the Lincoln Memorial and the Dr. Martin Luther King Memorial right over here. So they're pretty close to each other. 10-minute walk at the most between them. So we'll be looking at both of them sort of separately, and some of the things that have happened there. This is also just a great shot to get oriented. Behind the Lincoln is the Potomac River. The reason really that George Washington back in the 1790s is going to choose this location for the nation's capital, thinks that Potomac River someday is going to lead to Washington being this big commercial center, and it doesn't quite work out that way. But we're going to talk about that Potomac River here in just a minute, because this is not the Washington, D.C. that George Washington or even Abraham Lincoln would totally recognize. This area has all been built up on reclaimed land. So check out this photo, yeah, of I think this is late 1860s Washington. And so you see our Washington Monument is unfinished. There was a little bit of a financial problem that caused them to not be able to continue building when they began in the 1840s. Money runs out at about 1854, and they won't go back to work at the Washington Monument till long after the Civil War is done in the 1870s. And so finally, once they get money from Congress to finish the work, they'll go and they'll continue building with rock from a nearby quarry, which is why when you look at our Washington Monument today, it looks like it's two different colors. You're seeing the break in work. But the reason for sharing this photo today is to look at the scene just beyond the Washington Monument, unfinished as it is, to see all that water. As you can tell by looking at modern day photo, first off too, when you look to that green area across the river, that's Arlington, Virginia, and you see all the high-rise buildings and you see all the stuff happening there. And then you come back to this shot and you see just those empty hills. It's pretty amazing to compare and contrast these two images. So you notice all that water right up against the Washington Monument, which does not exist today. So in the late 1800s, there's going to be what they called the Land Reclamation Project, where they're going to decide to now dig out the Potomac River. It's not very deep in this photo. And so they're going to make it deeper, but make it less wide. And so because I'm not much of a science person, which I figure is okay on a National History Academy program, I have to explain this to myself in a very easy to understand way. I equate it with being at the beach. And when you're at the beach and you're digging a hole and you dig all that dirt and you take it and you fling it over, and now you have a big pile of dirt. That's kind of what they did with this land. They dug the river deeper, filled in all that they had dug up, and created what we now have as the west end of the mall. So the tidal basin, which is over here, where we have our famous cherry blossom trees, this all gets created in this as a result of this project, and all of this land gets added in the late 1880s. So once that happens, now we have this whole west end of the mall. We need to do something really special with that, right? In light of the tragic death of Abraham Lincoln in 1865, they'll decide to build a memorial to President Lincoln on this space. And of course, as with all our memorials on the National Mall, there's always a controversy of some sort. In this case, I don't know that they argued about a memorial to Lincoln himself, but where it was going to be located. And there was a particular member of Congress who said, there's no way, and I'm just going to clean it up a little bit, that we're going to build a memorial to President Lincoln in that swamp. So he saw that neck of the mall there and thought that just wasn't an appropriate place for building a memorial to President Lincoln. In reading more about this recently, it's really interesting that those in favor thought it was a great idea because it meant putting Lincoln's memorial out where there was nothing else happening. And it was like we're doing something really special. We're putting this memorial to Lincoln where people can enjoy just that space. Now it's built up a little bit more, but that was the original idea. And so poor Joe Cannon, the congressman who was not happy about it, got overruled, and Lincoln's memorial would be built in the west end of the mall between 1914 and 1922. And we have some great construction shots like this one that show how it was built. Again, I can't get into the science of it all, but I do notice this really deep foundation, which makes sense to me because if you're building a heavy marble memorial to President Lincoln on land that was once part of the Potomac River, you really need a strong foundation, and you can see that here. I love too that you can see the pieces of the columns getting ready to go up into place there. Gives us a sense of what it looks like. And if you've ever been there and you've wondered why you had to climb so many steps to get up there to see Lincoln in his big chair, here's why. We have this really deep foundation. And it's exciting. There's talk right now of a new museum exhibit in that space underneath the memorial that would allow visitors not to necessarily go in, which was something that happened years ago, but the chance to at least see what it looks like underneath there. So that would be a really exciting feature. We're still waiting to finalize details on that, but stay tuned. That could be pretty exciting. So this was between, as I said, 1914 and 1922. Big building designed by Henry Bacon. And he pretty much got to decide, I think, that he really wanted his friend Daniel Chester French to design the statue of Lincoln seated in his chair. And so this is the final version, and I think my favorite picture of them all, of the sites that we manage here. I love this one of the pieces of the Lincoln Memorial being put together. Daniel Chester French worked up in Massachusetts. He had an idea in his head. He was making this model of this statue of Lincoln. And when he decided to bring the model down to see how it looked in the Lincoln Memorial building, he realized it was way too small. So Lincoln from head to toe is 19 feet. He sits on an 11-foot pedestal. You should see me that I'm pointing to it, like you all can see that. Still haven't quite gotten the whole virtual thing down. I'm still working at it. But anyway, so the statue that Daniel Chester French brings down to DC is about the size of this pedestal. And imagine if you've been to Lincoln and you've hiked up all those steps and you get up there and you saw a statue of Lincoln the size of the pedestal. I would imagine you'd be a little bit disappointed. I think I would. And so French realizes he has to go back and make it a little bit bigger. And when he does that, he can't find a piece of rock that's big enough. So he ends up with 28 different pieces of marble all being put together to create the statue of Lincoln. And so this is just such a neat shot to see the workers working. I think it's 1920-ish, around there somewhere. And that is Daniel Chester French down front with the hat on. And of course, you see Lincoln without his head, which is a little maybe disconcerting, but still a really neat photo of the building of the Lincoln Memorial. And so that gives you an idea of that process and how that went about. get into a little bit more of the symbolism here. When this is being built, there is a definite emphasis on the idea, as it says right above Lincoln's head, in this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union. This was really all about President Lincoln and as savior of the Union, not so much maybe some of the other things we remember him for, but this was really the emphasis of those building this memorial. It was the result, as a lot of our memorials are, of a commission. So there was a Lincoln Memorial Commission that was tasked with choosing a location, choosing the artists, figuring out all of that. These are some really great old shots. They would finally open the memorial, officially dedicate it on May 30th, 1922. So we're gearing up next year, big year. Lincoln Memorial turns 100. So I'm hoping we have some big birthday party plans for Lincoln's memorial. But this is, I guess, another view from the Washington Monument, looking down on the Lincoln Memorial dedication. On that day, you see that there are government office buildings off to the right, and you see lots of cars. And this was kind of a big deal that this memorial was getting built and open. Look at all the cars around it. This is just really, really fun to look at. Here are the folks really key to this whole event. William Howard Taft is on the far left. He is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He is also president of the Lincoln Memorial Commission. So he was the one who organized the whole process, the building, the designing, all of that. And he oversees all of that as the commission president. Gentleman in the center is Warren Harding. So he's the president there to accept the memorial on behalf of the American people. But the guy that everybody was really excited to see is that fella on the right, who is Robert Todd Lincoln. That is President Lincoln's only surviving son. And so people were really excited that in his late 70s, here's Robert Todd Lincoln, you know, a link to President Lincoln, who they're honoring at this event, there on hand. He chose not to speak that day, but he wanted to be a participant. And I've read that he, while it was being built, he liked to have his driver drive him around to take a peek at it and keep an eye on things and watch how it was going. And Daniel French says that on occasion, he would ask him his recommendations about the statue, minor things, but he did get a little input from Robert Lincoln on the memorial. So, day of the dedication, Taft will speak, Harding will speak, Lincoln will be there in attendance, and the focus is really going to be on unity, that President Lincoln was the person who reunited the nation as the Civil War came to an end, and he focus should be about unity. And it's amazing. In fact, I have one line from President Harding's address that he gave at the dedication. There's some great silent YouTube video of the actual dedication if you're interested in this and you want to see it. It shows cars driving up to it. There's all kinds of neat stuff. But there are all the speeches available to look at too. And one of the things that President Harding says at this dedication, which is amazing, hating human slavery as he did, he doubtless believed in its ultimate abolition through the developing conscience of the American people, but he would have been the last man in the Republic to resort to arms to effect its abolition. Emancipation was a means to the great end, maintained union and nationality. So these gentlemen planning this memorial and planning this dedication event are really focused on this idea of maintaining the union and not at all thinking about emancipation and the idea that President Lincoln was so involved with helping to end slavery and all of that. So just as kind of a side note, it seems almost, it is suggested to the Lincoln Memorial Commission that maybe you should invite someone representing the African-American community to be a part of this event. So they invite Dr. Robert Moden, who is the president of the Tuskegee Institute, and he presented his speech to Chief Justice Taft a few weeks beforehand. And Taft apparently made a few suggestions and asked him maybe not to speak so forcefully on the issue of civil rights, which was something that, Moden thinks this is a perfect opportunity. I'm standing here at the feet of the great emancipator statue, brand new statue, and this would be a perfect time, 1922. Washington, D.C. is still essentially a southern city, and demonstrated by the fact that the people Dr. Moden that the people he is talking to are in a segregated audience. So even at the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial, we find segregation key to this event. And there are accounts of people being asked to move to one particular section and being really upset about that, and then causing a scene and leaving. So there are there is documentation about this whole event playing out. So Dr. Moden will give his speech, and it's fascinating if you're really interested in this. Again, not something I could really get too deep into now, but you can read the original speech, and you can then read the version of the speech he actually heard. I believe they're both at the Library of Congress online. You can compare and see how he was asked to tone down the language that he wanted to use. And of course, if you're familiar with things that have happened at the Lincoln Memorial, I'll get to it in a little bit here. This is not the only time that this happened at an event at the Lincoln Memorial. So here we are, Dr. Moden giving his speech at the dedication, wanting to talk about civil rights, but not really getting as deeply into it as he would have liked. So symbolism, I wanted to get to that really quickly before we get to some of the things that happened here. As I said, it was really all about unity, and you do find some key things related to the unity of the country here. You see the names of the states across the top here. There were 36 states in the country at the time of President Lincoln's death. And so there are 36 columns around the outside of the building, one for each of those states. There are, although you can't see them very well in this photo, there are the 48 states at the top here underneath the design. You can't quite see them. I was too close when I took this. But the 48 states in the country at the time that the building was finished in 1922. And since then, obviously, we've added 2 more states. As you're walking up to visit the Lincoln Memorial, you'll find a plaque down here on the plaza for the last 2 states, Alaska and Hawaii. There was no more room up on the roof to add any more states, so they get a plaque down front, and maybe that will be the case for any new states that get added, because we are representing Abraham Lincoln's interest and love of the Union. You wouldn't want to leave any states out. So another thing I thought was really creative in the way they wanted to represent the unity of the country in this building was by using materials that came from different parts of the country. So there's rock that came from the north and rock that came from the south. So they could look at this and say, look, this is totally representing a unified country by even the materials we use to build it. So the statue of Lincoln is made out of Georgia marble. The floor inside the chamber is Tennessee marble. There's Colorado marble. There's Vermont, I think, marble. Some Indiana limestone, rock, different kinds of rock from different places. And that was just another neat way to say that this was a building to represent a reunited country. So how do we get this whole idea of unity to a place where, if I'm giving a tour out at the Lincoln Memorial, most times when I ask, why did we build this for President Lincoln? Very often the answer would be that it's all about the work he did to help end slavery. And so how is it that we think of that today when really, when it was built, that really wasn't at all what they were thinking about? And we see that in the events that have taken place at this building. And one of my favorites to talk about, Miss Marion Anderson, who gave a concert here April 9th of 1939. It was Easter Sunday, and she had been denied the chance to sing in a building right down the street from us, the Daughters of the American Revolution's Constitution Hall. And because she was Black, they had a policy that said, African Americans could not perform in the building. And every time her manager tried to book a day for her to perform there, they were told it was busy. And so when kind of word got out that this policy existed, they tried different avenues. They tried to go through the DC school system, and there were at that point still schools that were segregated, so that was not going to work. And finally, someone said, "Let's just do an outdoor concert." And at first, they contemplated doing it right outside of Constitution Hall, which might have been interesting. And then, not quite sure where the idea comes from, but someone suggests the Lincoln Memorial, and it just seems like a brilliant idea. Like, why wouldn't we have her sing right here on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial? And so this is what happens. We did a presentation about her concert on the anniversary, April 9th, a couple weeks ago, and have a new favorite quote from this event. The fact that the Lincoln Memorial falls under the National Park Service, and we fall under the Department of the Interior. So it was really tasked. It went to the question of whether she could perform here, went to the Secretary of the Interior, whose name at the time was Harold Ickes, which I just love to say. And Harold Ickes went to Franklin Roosevelt, the president, and said, "Hey, is it okay? Do you mind?" And there's this whole other controversy that Eleanor Roosevelt was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution and chose to resign over this issue. So this really made this like a hot button issue around Washington, and FDR just wants to stop talking about this. He doesn't want this to be an issue anymore. And when Harold Ickes asks, "Is it okay if Marion Anderson sings at the Lincoln Memorial?" FDR's response was, "She can sing from the top of the Washington Monument if she wants to." And so he just wanted this story, I think, to calm down a bit. So she ends up 75,000 people out on the National Mall that day to hear her perform, and many more than she ever would have seen if or performed in front of if she had actually been in a concert hall somewhere. I think Constitution Hall has just under 4,000 seats maybe. So anyway, big crowd, and tons of people got to hear her. And you can see that she's got these microphones in front of her. So it was blasted all over the place. People got to hear her. And so she had this huge influence of not only performing to a crowd of all different races there in person, but also reaching to many, many people who got to listen to her over the radio, including a young boy down in Atlanta, Georgia, who was listening on the radio, and a few years later would be inspired to write a school paper about Miss Marion's concert. And he would talk about how Miss Marion had this amazing opportunity to perform on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And yet that night, she and her mom, who came down from Philadelphia, could not stay in a hotel in Washington, D.C. This is 1939. And she wasn't able to stay in a hotel because of her race. So we have this one, great moment that she's able to do this beautiful concert, but then there's still that awful racism still existing in the city. And what's just really cool about all of this, and a story that I've just become fascinated with, is the fact that the young boy who would write this paper would one day grow up to share the very same spot on the Lincoln Memorial steps with Miss Marion Anderson. And sure everybody recognizes Dr. Martin Luther King giving his very famous "I Have a Dream" speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on August 28th, 1963. I can't help but point out the fact that there are two park rangers in this picture, because it just warms my heart every time I see it. These two guys, one here, one kneeling down front, because it just is so cool to be reminded that park rangers are there when historic things are happening, and just always makes me wonder if they had any idea when they woke up that morning that they were going to be tasked with standing at the Lincoln Memorial 2 feet from Dr. King as he's giving this speech. But yes, it's really inspiring as a ranger to be able to look at this photo and all that it means for everybody. So there are so many connections between Dr. King and Miss Marion. If you've ever heard her sing, or if you have the ability, I'm telling you, I can give you Google and YouTube links for a lifetime. Marion Anderson's concert is available on audio to listen to. You can also YouTube a clip of about 1.5 minutes where you hear Harold Ickes introduce her, which is really cool. And also you hear her first number, which is My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty. You all know that song. Well, if you've ever listened to the I Have a Dream speech, right near the end, Dr. King also quotes from that same song. And so it just always makes me wonder, is he just using those words because they're appropriate words, or is he, you know, taken in with this whole idea that he's standing on those steps? He knows that, you know, she was there and that she sang that song. It's all just all kinds of cool history stuff combining. Add to that Marion Anderson is at the March on Washington. She is on the program, if you look at the actual program, to sing the national anthem. And because of the crowd, there it is. Her concert was 75,000 people. His march, well, he and his friends' march, Dr. King's podium right about there, was 250,000 people. So we have a huge crowd of people, and Miss Marion is first up on the program to sing the national anthem, and she can't get through the crowd, and so she's unable to perform the anthem, and she will sing a song later on in the program. I think it was soon after Dr. King's speech, so my dream to find out someday is if they actually did meet. I sure hope so, because I just think it's such a cool connection. These two people sharing this history with the Lincoln Memorial. Here's the view from what the Lincoln side of things would have looked like, and you can get a better sense of why Miss Marion would have a tough time getting through the crowd. Those office buildings still exist in the 1960s. They get torn down in the 1970s. So when I showed you that overview of the mall at the very beginning, and you saw that pond off on the right side, that's what that area today is known as Constitution Gardens, but back then was still office buildings. Would have made it very difficult for her to get through this crowd with all these people. And there's also a little video of her singing. She sang, He's Got the Whole World in His Hands that day. So big deal, this March on Washington and the impact it's had on the history of the National Mall and the Lincoln Memorial in particular. I'm sure a lot of you recall John Lewis, passed away last year. He was the youngest person on the program to speak as part of the March on Washington. And just like Dr. Moden, he had this speech prepared, and it was deemed a little bit too radical, like too fiery for what the March organizers wanted the speakers to have to say. And he was pretty much told, literally right before he was to give this speech, that you've got to tone this down too. And so fascinating that two people at events at this memorial would have the same fate. They would be told by others around them that you really need to watch your language. You know, I think he's in his early 20s at this point, so he's all hothead, fired up, and wants to say what's on his mind. And yet there's still politics involved, and how do we not offend some of the other members of the group who are presenting speeches and things. And so John Lewis went to a back room up near the Lincoln statue and altered his speech a little bit to make the fellow people he was part of the march organizers happy. And so what a connection between that and what happened to Dr. Moden in the same location years apart. So I'd like to point him out because he's someone people are kind of familiar with because he had a very long career in the civil rights movement. But here he is at, I want to say 22. I may be off by a year or so, but he was pretty young back then when he was making this speech. I love to point out this photo. I think it just really captures just a young person at the March on Washington and what it must have been like to be in this crowd of people and to be experiencing this. And it's great to read first person accounts and to get a sense of what it would have been like to be there. I've been fortunate to get to know this lady, and so I've heard from her what she was thinking, but I love to pose this to students to think about the look on her face and, you know, what is she feeling? What is she thinking about as she takes part? You can see the people all around her. She was 12. This was her 12th birthday, August 28th, 1963. And she came to Washington from Detroit, Michigan, to visit her aunt who lived in Washington, D.C., she and her mom. And she said she had heard Dr. King speak once before in Detroit, and she wanted to hear him again. When she knew he was going to be speaking at this event, she wanted to go hear him. And it ends up that she dedicates her life to the civil rights movement as well, and has been doing all kinds of work related to that. And told me just, I think the last time I spoke with her, she said she had been counting votes during the last election. So still involved in civic-minded activities and things like that. The best part of this story is that she had no idea this picture was taken of her when she was turning 12 in 1963. And it showed up on a calendar that somebody saw and pointed out to her, I want to say within the last 10, 15 years. It's been very recent. And so she's connected with the photographer who took this picture, and she's spoken a lot about her experiences at the march. And the banner that she holds in her hand there, she recently donated to the African American History and Culture Museum in Washington, D.C. as part of its March on Washington exhibit. She felt that it would could be seen by a lot more people if she shared it with the museum. So that's kind of cool. If you happen to find yourself at that museum, look for Miss Edith's banner. You'll find it in the exhibit area. So one of the things I love to point out to students when they come to visit the Lincoln Memorial, or now, just to make sure when you do go visit someday, make sure you stop on that middle step. The spot, you get halfway up the steps, you need to stop, if you're me, and take a breath for a minute. You're right at the spot where Miss Marion sang and where Dr. King gave his famous speech. And it's been since 2003, the 40th anniversary, carved into those steps where you can find the I Have a Dream words, Dr. King, March on Washington, 1963. And so you can put your feet right there, right where those other events were happening. And I actually wrote it down when the introductions were happening about how y'all are concerned with the power of place. And I just feel like so much of the mall is about remembering the memorials that remember people, but here is where you can stand in a spot, and it is all about that power of place. You can stand right where Dr. King stood, and you can look out over the mall and you can imagine what it would be like to share your dream with people all over. I have, as you all know now, I've been on the mall a very long time, and in 2003, we have photos of when they were carving this into the stone, and Coretta King was still alive, and she was here with her children as they were doing this, and it was really neat to see. So they've done this. They've marked the spot where this happened, but they also thought that maybe we should do a little bit more to honor Dr. King just beyond this spot on the step. Let's build a memorial to him, and so that gets going. Oh goodness, time. Here it is. This is Dr. King's memorial. I call it the new memorial. It's going to be 10 years old this year. It opened up in 2011. It was meant to be dedicated on August 28th of 2011. And that week we happened to have an earthquake and then a hurricane. And so the hurricane fell on that Saturday, the 28th, and we were unable to do the official dedication then, but it happened in October, and the memorial was opened that week based on a line from the I Have a Dream speech, out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. And so what you see here are the mountain of despair and the stone of hope. Here's the mountain and here's the stone. And I think of the mountain of despair being all the things that Dr. King dealt with as a young person growing up in the South in particular. Segregation, racism, the idea that he couldn't play with the kids maybe he wanted to play with, or sit in the front seat on the bus. The essay he wrote, the essay he wrote about Miss Marion's concert, he actually won the opportunity to go present his essay at another school, and he and his teacher rode a bus to go to that other school, and either on the way or on the way back, they were sitting in front and they got asked to move to the back. And so I'm sure all of those experiences piled up and made Dr. King the hope that he became for so many. So the design is this mountain of despair. There's a piece in the middle missing, like something has been pulled out, and it's the stone of hope. Here's what it looks like front on. And here's the part I, love to ask students to look at this and tell me, what do you think looks like it's missing from this statue? I think you could probably all be yelling out right now, his legs and his feet, which seems so weird since he was a guy who used his feet so much for marching. Why would we not have his feet? Part of it is, I think we want him to look, I think you see it really well on this image, that he's coming out of that stone of hope. Like you want him to be part of that stone, not totally out, but yet part of this looks like this statue is unfinished. And by having this look unfinished, it reminds us that his work was left unfinished. Dr. King was assassinated and died when he was 39 years old. So he had a lot left to do. And hopefully by looking at this unfinished statue, we're reminded of the work that still needs to be done, and hopefully inspires us to think about who's going to do that work, and that hopefully it's anybody who's there looking at it, and it's anybody who feels like they can make a difference. And so hopefully that's what this statue helps to do, inspire folks to continue the work. And Dr. King had some pretty strong convictions as far as nonviolence. We see the words of Dr. King throughout this memorial, and there's some pretty deep quotes along this wall, and the other side of the mountain there's another wall of quotes. And so that can serve as inspiration to be able to use our words and not fight, and promote the idea of nonviolence, which was so important to him. The idea of education, I kind of joke a lot with when I have young students out at the memorial, that you'll read these quotes when you get a little bit older. Dr. King went to school for a long time, so he used a lot of big words. And I feel like there's a lot we can learn from that idea of education and nonviolence and kindness, just treating people the way you want to be treated. That should be something that is following in the footsteps of Dr. King and his legacy. This is a quote I pointed out just as an example of one of the quotes that you find on the wall at the memorial, because it came from a speech he gave in Washington, D.C. that was not the I Have a Dream speech. He came here in 1959 as part of a march for integrating schools. And it's just got a nice ring to it. Make a career of humanity, commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. So hopefully you have a chance sometime to come by and visit and be able to check out all the words that are in this memorial. When you're standing in front of Dr. King and you're looking out as his statue would look out, you see across the tidal basin to the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. And it's an interesting view, and it's a neat connection because Thomas Jefferson, obviously the writer of the Declaration of Independence, who wrote the famous words, "All men are created equal." We like to think of this as a bit of a line. I'm not sure if it's clear because of the way I've been showing the pictures, but from Jefferson to Dr. King to Lincoln, you could draw a straight line if you could walk on the water there and not get hit by cars as you crossed roads. But it's a line between these three sites. And while we acknowledge that Thomas Jefferson wrote these amazing words, he definitely didn't live up to the words that he wrote about all men being created equal. As someone who was a slave owner, we imagine the conversations that Jefferson and King and Lincoln could all compare notes about, particularly these two. The statue of Dr. King shows him with a scroll of paper in his hand. Thomas Jefferson's statue shows him with a scroll of paper in his hand, and neither artist ever admitted or told us what they intended those scrolls of paper to be. So I was out with a group of students one day years ago, and they debated if they could be letters back and forth. What would Dr. King want to say to Thomas Jefferson? And what would Thomas Jefferson want to say to Dr. King? Was a fascinating conversation with students out in these places. So imagine this line though of Jefferson to Lincoln to King. All of them use his words. He used this Declaration of Independence. You find the words "all men are created equal" in the Gettysburg Address, and then you find them again in Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And so it's this line that the mall kind of tells the stories of kind of our evolution and how we go through history and recognize the different people who have contributed and the different stories that we get to tell. And maybe I should just stop about there. Hey, wow, it's right on time. This is just one last shot of the memorial so you can get a sense of sort of what it looks like. Wow, shocked.
Woohoo! Um, so excited, Jen. I'm so excited that everybody else got to hear your wonderful tour of the National Mall and the rich histories and the connections and those hidden gems of stories that you really bring to life. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to tell you, you have many fans in the Facebook chat with hellos, and Donna Jackson Jenkins writes, Jen, this is amazing. Thank you. But we do have questions for you too.
Okay,
People
I'm ready.
Still have questions for you. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, pretty early on when you were talking about Lincoln. Marie Drogalis asked, how do they connect the marble together? And are there marble pegs connecting the places, or how is that working?
Do you think that's referring to the actual statue?
I believe so.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's a great question. I imagine it being like super glue, but I can't imagine that that's correct. But yet, when you look at it, you can't tell where one piece stops and the next one starts. So I probably need to get back to you and find out through someone. We have a whole department that's known as cultural resources who can give me the mechanics of it better than I can. I guess I never really thought too much about how it all got put together. So I'll have to get back to you.
That's wonderful. And this is great because it always helps us grow as educators too. So thank you. All right.
How did we put it all together?
So this one is more of a personal question. Do you have a personal favorite memorial on the mall? Are you allowed to say?
You kind of joke that it's like, picking your favorite kids, which probably isn't allowed. Is it okay if it's not one I just talked about? I really enjoy the FDR Memorial because it's, and we've talked about this before. There's just so much going on there. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to share, and it's just a great story. I mean, I have to say, I've gotten much more into this story as I've learned more, and connecting King and Anderson and all these people together, and this whole idea of the changing meaning of the Lincoln Memorial, I just have found that to be really interesting. But 22 years ago when I started, this is really sharing things I probably shouldn't. I was stationed at the Lincoln Memorial for 3 solid weeks, and that's some hard marble, let me tell you. And it is hot in the summer at Lincoln, and it is cold in the winter. And my love of Lincoln faded fairly quickly because it was just a lot of, it's the most visited of our memorials, and it's a lot of the, basic, where do I get something to eat? Where's the bathroom? That kind of stuff. And I always found that FDR was a place you could really, first of all, people have to want to get there because it's sort of off the beaten path to get to it. And there's just such a rich story to tell that it was fun to do that. And it was a great place to be. And when the water's going and the flowers are blooming, it's just a beautiful spot. But yeah, Lincoln's a great story now. So it's probably still not my most favorite place to be all the time. But yeah, I think FDR is my favorite.
Thanks. And we'll give you permission to change that as things.
Oh, it happens all the time. Yeah.
There you go. Do you know, have there been any major pushes to add other memorials to the National Mall? Is that a current conversation?
Well, I remember years ago them saying, we're not building any more memorials on the mall because there's just too much stuff and we need to stop. And we opened a memorial last week. The World War I memorial up on Pennsylvania Avenue opened up last week. Was that last Friday? So there's still some work to be done on it, but they took Pershing Park and they turned it into a National World War I memorial. And they did a virtual program, which you can look for the World War I Memorial Commission, and you can find the program that they did there virtually last week. I believe some of the later wars, they are still talking about Desert Storm and some of the other wars may be getting memorials at some point. The Park Service isn't in the business of building them. The Park Service will manage them once they've been constructed and stuff. So I usually find out in the process that, oh, we're getting a new memorial soon. You better learn a little bit about it. So yeah, that's where we are. We opened Eisenhower in September, which is also a new one, down in front of the Department of Education building and behind on the side of Air and Space. So it's not mall. When you think of the mall, it's maybe not that space, but we are caretakers of it. So that's a really cool site if you haven't had a chance to explore that yet.
All right, and so I'm going to bring us back to Lincoln, though.
Cool.
Barbara Walters wants to know, what was the cost of building the Lincoln Memorial?
Oh, goodness. Goodness. It's in the 2 to 3 million range. I feel like Lincoln or Jefferson, one of them's 2 and one of them's 3, and now I just can't remember which is which. It's in the 2 to 3 million range somewhere, but I could also find that out for you and let you know.
Thank you, Jen. Do you have an estimate of how many people visit the mall each year?
Last I heard, and of course last year doesn't count, last year I heard 36 million.
Wow. Okay. Wow, thank you. We had a question from Ellen Williams Davis, who wanted to confirm how to spell Dr. Moden's name, because she wants to look up the speech, and I think it's Moten, but I just wanted to check with you as well.
Yes. That's a great question. I will look it up. I don't know for sure. It's E-N or O-N. Go ahead. Do you have anything else? I'll look it up.
We do. All right. So questions are coming in. Arden Billings said, it said that depending on the angle from which you view it, the statue of Lincoln has different expressions: smile, sadness, a gentle, neutral expression. In your experience, have you seen this? And is there any indication that French, who was a master sculptor, intended to do anything like that?
You know, I don't know. I don't know that I've ever heard the facial expression. So we have all kinds of myths about Lincoln, which I'm really excited that I totally forgot to include. But the famous myth is that you can see somebody's head carved in the back of Lincoln's. Like if you look at the hair, you can see all kinds of people. We've heard from Lee to Grant to everybody. I have not heard anything that I can recall about the facial expressions. A big thing is the hands. French went out of his way to make sure the hands were differentiated, that one is a fist and one is an open hand. And that was done to show the two sides of Lincoln's personality, the kind of stressed out, the fist was like the stressed wartime president versus the relaxed guy who liked to tell jokes, who liked to have his kids run through cabinet meetings. And, that was one way of showing personality. And that I'm very well aware of the hands. I don't know that I've ever come across anything that says facial expression. So that's really interesting. I don't know off the top of my head, but Harold Holzer just wrote a new biography about Daniel Chester French. I've read it. I don't recall anything about that in there, but you might want to check that out.
That's awesome. And that's a great segue to our next question, Jen.
Wow.
Lori Gubala asked, do you have a favorite kids book on the history of the mall and or monuments?
No, and that's a huge problem. I always joke about wanting to write one, but I think that might be a conflict of interest. Trying to think about the mall. No, there's some cute ones about Lincoln. There's a lot of great ones. A lot of the King family have written books about Dr. King and Martin's Big Words, and Christine Ferris, the sister, wrote a great kids book about Dr. King. About the mall in particular, oh goodness. There's one not one that really addresses the history that I've come across very well. I got my niece one that's like a Where's Waldo, where you have to try and find things all over the mall, but I don't know that that's exactly a It's not a where's, it's that kind of thing where you have to spot the different things, but you're looking at different museums and different memorials. So it was my way of sneaking it in. I golly, I can't off the top of my head think of a really good kids book that I've used about the whole mall. I'm sure there is. Yeah, there's some about Lincoln, but about the whole mall, I'm not so sure. Perhaps she'd like to write one. Somebody needs to write a nice, good one.
There you go. Well, Lori also wrote that FDR is also her favorite memorial too. And her girls, when her girls were little, they would, when it was built, they loved to go sit and hang out with Fala. So maybe
Yes,
possibility there. And our very own Bill Sellers says that Lincoln Memorial was $3 million.
Thank you.
Build. So there we go. And then
And Moden looks like an ON.
there we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Debbie Roberts wants to say thank you for the fabulous presentation. She had the pleasure of meeting you, Jen, in 2011 during the MPTC annual convention in DC. Veronica Bristensky asked, does NPS offer any kind of regularly scheduled walking tour with a ranger of sites on the mall, something similar to a ranger-led battle walk at Gettysburg?
Over the years, we have on and off tried to do different things like that. We have done them. We have done the short talk, we've done the extended, walk around, cover a couple memorials. And we've just, obviously right now everything's sort of on hold. We have a, I think it's fair to say we've had a hard time attracting people so that it made it not so feasible. And I used to be able to say, well, if you're really interested, maybe call and see if we could work something out. At this point right now, we're not even totally full-time, although all back in the park right now. I'd like to say that someday, yes, we'll do that again. But we haven't had a huge demand for it. I think that's fair to say that if that were something you were interested in, I would say it might be worth, hey, we're coming to town. But yeah, we have to figure it out. It's a different kind of visitor, I think, and feel free, whoever asked that, to correct me. You're going to a battlefield, you specifically really want to learn all there is to learn about those sites. And, you have very dedicated people to those battlefields. And that history, when you're coming to DC, you have a list of a zillion things you want to check off, and you want to get all your photos, and you want to hit all the museums, and you want to hit all the different sites. And so we find that we don't always get people who really want to stand and talk to somebody for an hour about Lincoln. It's the rare person who asks you a question at Lincoln that gets you to talk like I just did. And so that's why it's fun to be able to do this. I'm different in that I get to talk to school kids all the time. And so I have that opportunity a little bit more. But I got to use big words today. That was exciting. Should see me trying to explain the mountain of despair to first graders. Anyway, so, if it were something you were interested in, I would definitely say it's worth contacting the park. And maybe it will be something we see again. Staffing is going down in a lot of the parks. And so the resources of putting rangers on programs like that, I would love to, I've been in the Park Service a long time. I came from Battlefield Park, so I would love to see us do that. But our visitation seems to be a little bit different than a historical park like that. But prove me wrong and come ask for tours.
Well, so Jen, this is how we're going to end our time together. Our last two questions, one from Marie and one from Carol. Marie wants to know, is everything open now? She wants to come back again soon. And Carol wants to know then, how might we contact you or another ranger for that discussion and for that tour?
Okay, so we never were closed in the sense that we can't close the door at Lincoln, because there is no door at Lincoln. Well, there's a basement door, but no. Any of our outside sites are and have always been open. The Washington Monument is currently closed. Ford's Theater is currently closed, which falls under us as National Mall and Memorial Parks. Belmont Paul, Women's Equality Monument, is also closed. Anything you can go into currently is not open, but any of our outdoor sites, any of the memorials that you can visit outside are available. Rangers are out on a very limited basis, just sort of roving around, and available, for questions and short history, I guess. I don't know how much of that's happening, because I have not been out very much. I suspect it sounds like we're on the path to probably opening up again soon. So I think we may be more out and about than we have been in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And I am happy to share my email if that's something I can do. Maybe can I put it in the chat or whatever?
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and copy that over to Facebook as well, so that anybody who wants to contact you can go ahead and do so.
Sure. Yeah, so I do education now, and so I coordinate school programs. So if you contacted me and you're not necessarily a school program, I might still be able to work something out. Could find somebody to tour you around, or maybe me tour you around. We'll see what we can do.
And for those who are trying to see it, just in case, it's Jennifer_Epstein@nps.gov. So we'll put that over in the chat as well for Facebook. And can any ranger sign off on the Junior Ranger program?
Should be able to, yes.
There you go.
Yes.
Jen, it has been a treat to have you today. Thank you so much for all of your stories, for sharing the history, answering our questions. We have truly appreciated it.
Well, thank you. Always a pleasure to hang out with you. And thank you all for your great questions. And I feel like I have some homework. I have to look up some answers.
And Jen, thank you so much again. That was just such a wonderful presentation. And for everyone watching, thank you for joining us today. We will be here again next week, Wednesday at 4 p.m. with a virtual tour from Little Rock Central High School. So I hope to see you all there.
Oh my gosh. Awesome. Amy and I went there.